Shut up and sit down.
88 Mile Per Hour Universe, what's up? This is Eric. I'm down here in the 88 Mile Per Hour Studios in Florida once again, and joined by my friend and studio colleague, Hans Stuck, the German Shepherd, right about there. He's laying at ease right now, so he's not doing much. This week, we are looking at a Porsche 550A Spyder, 550 Spyder. Now, these were produced between 1953 and 1956. The interesting thing about these was there was only 90 of these produced. So for a really iconic car, there were not many of these made at all, but everybody sort of knows who these are. Now, these were modeled after the Porsche 356, which is a whole nother conversation and a whole nother car that we can get into on another day. But let's see, this premiered in 1953 in the Paris Auto Show. It's got an aluminum engine in this, which is known as the Furman engine. And that was actually, what it really is it's really a boxer engine, which is also known as a Contra engine, which is all the same thing. Basically, what a Contra engine was invented by Carl Benz in 1896. And it's basically more commonly known as a boxer engine right now. The reason why they call it a boxer engine is because the pistons actually go opposite ways. Like a V goes like this, the boxer goes sideways. Obviously, inline is right behind each other. So they called it a boxer because of, you know, the sort of punching motion of the two cylinders on each side going in and out at the same time. The interesting thing is they basically mimic each other on either side of that engine. The piston on this side will hit top dead center. At the same time, the piston on this side will hit top dead center. So it's an interesting engine, just different techniques and why people use that. It's commonly known in Subarus today. Porsche obviously has the Boxster, which has a Boxer engine in it, which is a combo name between the Boxer and the Speedster. Another random fact, that was actually created by one of the employees at Porsche, like named the car. So the guy called it the Boxster and he did it. So it was pretty cool. This is a 4-cylinder air-cooled engine. Interesting thing about the air cool with these, you can kind of see it right in there. It's a mid-engine rear mount. So it's not your typical sort of rear engine like a lot of Porsches are back where the spare tire is back here, but it's a mid-engine. So the interesting thing about that is it really gives a nice balance to the car. And that's really kind of where a lot of the engines want to be or like to be as far as in the racing class, that is, because it sort of gives the optimal balance. Now, these were a bit of a handful, and they could sort of tend to rotate on themselves, these engines, right, or these cars right here. So that was a bit of a, you know, a conundrum when you were driving these. So they were known to do that, but they were inspired off of like the 1930s auto union race cars. So they sort of took some of that technology, put it into this one right here, naturally aspirated. Nice thing about air-cooled is you don't have to have the big radiator or big vents or anything like that on the side to cool the radiator. Obviously, to cool the radiator, since they're air-cooled, you don't have a radiator in these. So air-cool lends itself to giving kind of more interesting design and giving more liberties that you can do with the design. So it's a neat car. It's got the clamshell in the back, which we've talked about before, but it's easy access. You can access all the rear suspension, the engine, do everything all at once. So it just makes it a little bit easier on that. So these cars were mostly seen in silver. Now, this one's in black, obviously, but the silver was mostly what they were sold in out of the 90 that were made, and so much so that they had to paint the tails different colors on a lot of the cars. They were silver, but paint the tails because there were so many of these cars with that limited amount that were in these races that teams had problems differentiating the cars as they were going by. Now, of course, they could have the numbers on the side, which would have been right here. It's a gumball shape that they'll put on the race cars. The interesting thing about some of the numbers is they'll change with the cars back then. You won't see the same number, even though it's the same car. So like the Mille Miglia, the 1,000-mile race, if you see, you know, a number 252 on the door, what that actually signifies is that you're leaving at 2:52 a.m. in the morning or whatever time it may signify. So that's what your number was. So it's kind of interesting. So it also helps you sort of preserve, or I should say recognize the cars and what races they're in back in the day based on their number, because they were changing. So you could sort of tell by at a glance, like, oh, that's the car in this race because of the number. So really interesting, I think, in that fact. But they would use like greens, reds, and blues, and I think even yellows on the back there, so you could sort of signify the difference of these. Now, they originally came with a 4-speed. And in 1965, they switched it over to a 5-speed on these, so there's a little bit of a variance. Dual overhead cams, getting back to the engine a little bit, 2 valves per cylinder, and they were equipped with like a twin-barrel Solex PJJ carburetor. So they had a lot of technology in these. 108 horsepower, which is not a lot. 89 foot-pounds of torque, but the thing about it, I don't know if it's a coincidence of how much it weighs in the name or not. I don't really know that. But it weighs 550 kilograms, or to us, which makes more sense, or to us in the U.S., 1,212 pounds. So when you have that little horsepower in such a little car, that thing is going to scoot like that. So it's interesting. 1,200 pounds is like a third of a car, like a hot... Excuse me. Sorry about that. Is a third of like what a hot hatch might weigh, about 3,000 pounds or something like that. So 1,200 pounds is just nothing in this car. So gave it largely neutral handling in these cars, except for before what I mentioned. They'll sort of like to loop itself once in a while because of that. It's actually so low, this car, just the profile of it and the windshield and being convertible and how low it is. In 1954, one of the famous racers back then there, Hans Hermann, actually drove it under a railroad gate on the course as it was closed, to save time so he didn't have to wait. So the car was able to sneak under a railroad gate. I mean, that's how low these things were. And this basically was a road and track car. That's sort of what helped create the name road and, not create it, but sort of put that vernacular in the community, was a road and track car, because you could drive it to the track, normal roads, race it all day long, and drive it home, and the thing was reliable. I mean, it was just a reliable car back then, and they would go and they would win everything because of a power to weight ratio. That's kind of the interesting thing on these. Now, of course, everybody knows these cars because of James Dean. He had died in one. It was called the Little Bastard. It was a silver one. And he was racing it as well. It was numbered 130 on it. The VIN was, I think, 550-0055 on that. So it's a really well-known car. People know everything about it. They know the whole stories. They're fascinated by it. But he had the graphics, as I said, on there before. But that's a whole nother story on that. But he hit a gentleman in a 1950 Ford Custom named Donald Turnspeeds, I believe. And that was sort of created the legend of that. September 30th, 1955 is when that happened. So, I mean, that's sort of an iconic moment in time, an iconic moment in Porsche history, an iconic moment with this car, because everybody relates that to James Dean, even though it's back in the day. So it's interesting. Now, this car has basically... People liken it to the modern cars now of the Boxster or the Cayman. It's just similar, sort of modeled after that. Whether it's true or not, you can see the resemblances. You can see the similarities of what those cars are and the essence of it. There's also a handful of companies that make reproductions or repops or kit cars or whatever you want to call it. They make it from various ranges of, here's a body to a rolling chassis to turnkey engines. So it's a really interesting car, and kind of, I think with the 427 Cobra, it's in kit car form, and the 356 really. There's very few cars that when they are in kit car form are acceptable, and I think this is one of them because it's such a unique car. There were so few made, and it's just a really beautiful car. So hopefully you enjoyed this week. I'll come at you with a few more. If you have any die-casts that are really unusual, want to talk to us about it, I can use them on here. It'll be great. Otherwise, check out our main show, 88 miles per hour. We have the studio reviews, which we're doing now. We have the 88 mile per hour, 88-second car spotting, so please check that out as well. Check us out on Instagram, 88 mile per hour baby. Also, my Instagram personal is Eric Nonies. Please check that out. Like and subscribe to the videos. Tell a friend. Really enjoy doing these. Hopefully you find these interesting, and we'll keep these coming at you, and we'll keep showing you a bunch of shows. From myself and Hans Stuck, who has... Nope, he hasn't really moved a lot down there. I'll tell you about Hans Stuck and why that name is some other time. But if you know who it is, hopefully you'll appreciate that. See you next time, 88 mile per hour. We'll see you in the studio next time. We'll talk about another car. Take care. Platz, Hans Stuck, Platz. Braver Hund.